A millionaire humiliates a cleaning lady at his company, unaware that at the end of the day, he would need her to close a $1 million deal. The morning had barely begun when the mirrored Global X building was already bustling with activity. Employees, in suits, hurried in with briefcases in hand, cell phones glued to their ears, and looks of anticipation on their faces. It was the day of the meeting with international investors. A unique opportunity to close the biggest deal in the company's history. The corridors, normally cold and silent, seemed alive, filled with hurried footsteps and conversations cut short by the tension of the moment. In the midst of that corporate rush, she passed by almost invisibly. Eliane, 38, with light brown skin and an impeccably ironed blue uniform, carefully pushed the cleaning cart down the main corridor. With her hair tied back in a simple bun and her eyes fixed on the floor, she knew well the weight of walking among people who pretend not to see you. She had been working as a cleaner in that building for 4 years, and even though she was always punctual, discreet, and efficient, she was treated like a piece of furniture. That morning, however, was about to become unforgettable, not just for her, but for everyone who insisted on not seeing her. As she wiped the floor near the reception area, Eliane overheard the buzz about the arrival of Chinese businessmen. No one imagined that she understood everything, word for word. As she pushed the bucket to clean the hall, an intern ran by and, without looking, bumped into it, causing it to fall over with force. The water spread across the floor, draining quickly. Before Eliane could grab the cloth and contain the damage, Mr. Caesar's thunderous voice cut through the air. "What the hell is this?" He approached with long strides, his dark suit impeccable and his eyes flashing. "You want to sabotage my company now, is that it? Look what you've done, woman. Are you going to wait for an investor to slip and fall so you can be fired for just cause?" Eliane tried to explain in a low voice that the bucket had been knocked over by accident, but Caesar didn't want to listen. He pointed his finger right at her face. "You should be invisible. Do you understand? Invisible. Your job is not to show up. It's not to get in the way." Employees stopped to watch. The scene. Bruna, the secretary, pretended to organize folders, and Leonardo, the project manager, looked away at his cell phone. Eliane remained there, kneeling, drying the water with her hands, her face hot but without shedding a tear. The pain she felt was already familiar. Silence for her was a shield and also a knife. But she did not react. She just lowered her head, because she knew that this world was not ready to listen to those who carried dignity in silence. Mr. Caesar turned around, snorting, and headed for the elevator, still muttering insults. Eliane remained on the floor for a few more seconds, as if she needed to collect more than water. She needed to gather her strength. When she finally got up, she straightened her uniform, put away the soaked cloth, and pushed the cart toward the storage room, trying to compose herself. On the way, she passed 2 employees who, upon seeing her, stopped talking and moved out of her way, so as not to bump into her. It was like this every day, but on that day, the wound was more exposed. When she entered the kitchen to wash her hands, she found her old notebook on the chair. It was a simple notebook with a yellowed cover where she wrote down vocabulary in different languages. She picked up a blue pen, sat down for a minute, and wrote an ideogram she had memorized the night before in Mandarin. Resilience. She took a deep breath, like someone who keeps a truth in their heart that the world has not yet discovered. She knew what she carried. She knew about her education, her years of dedication to the Chinese language and culture, her fluency in 10 languages, the diploma that now lay forgotten in a drawer at home. But in that building, none of that mattered. To them, she was just the woman with the bucket, and yet she persisted. Because even when no one sees, dignity remains intact. What Eliane did not yet know was that that morning would mark the end of silence and the beginning of a change so great that even her notebooks could not have predicted it. The day continued at full speed at Global X headquarters. While the upper floors bustled with last-minute preparations and printed spreadsheets, Eliane continued her invisible journey. Every step she took down the hallways, every desk she cleaned, every coffee cup she collected seemed like small, automatic acts. But inside, something was boiling inside her. She had been humiliated in front of everyone, but what hurt the most was not the shouting, nor the finger pointed at her face. It was the fact that no one had spoken up. No words of support, no looks of solidarity, nothing. It was as if her dignity was a burden she alone had to bear. Even those who knew her by name pretended not to see her. Bruna, the secretary, with whom she had shared stories about motherhood while cleaning the kitchen, passed her hours later and didn't even say hello. Leonardo, the manager who always praised her punctuality, looked away when they crossed paths in the hallway. And the others? They pretended nothing had happened, as if that moment of public humiliation were part of company protocol. There, only power had a voice, and those who carried a floor cloth were not heard, no matter how many languages they spoke. But Eliane did not give in to lamentations. She kept her pain to herself, like someone who shapes resistance. Her eyes were more attentive, her steps more firm. She knew she was being watched, but not with respect, with scorn. Still, she remained standing, working as if silence were armor. She knew that real value doesn't need to shout, it just needs a moment to be revealed. At lunchtime, Eliane chose not to eat in the cafeteria. Instead, she went up to the technical terrace, a little used place where she liked to breathe for a few minutes. There, sitting on a concrete step, she opened her simple lunch, a roll with egg wrapped in aluminum foil, and her old language notebook. She ate slowly, her eyes fixed on the notes she had made the night before, business terms in Mandarin, expressions of welcome, and contract clauses, words that most of the company's employees didn't even know how to pronounce. As she chewed, she memorized. That routine was her escape valve. It was there that she remembered who she really was, how she had been recognized as one of the best students in her language arts program, how, before her husband's death, she had been an interpreter at international events. But after the tragedy, the bills came, her pension was delayed, and she had to accept anything to feed her daughter. She chose to work as a cleaner, not because she lacked ability, but out of love. Love for her daughter, Anna Julia. Love for survival. Love for herself. And even under daily humiliation, she never stopped studying, growing, dreaming. She believed that one day her chance would come, and when it did, she would not hesitate. Her greatest fear was not contempt. It was going through life without being useful. And that she knew she would never allow. On that terrace, to the distant sound of the city pulsing below, Eliane made a silent promise. No matter how long it took, she would show who she was. And when she did, no one would be able to pretend they hadn't seen her. Eliane's house was just over 40 minutes from the company, in a modest and noisy neighborhood, where the streets were narrow, and the corner shops mingled with the sound of radios playing in the windows. It was a simple place, but full of history, and there lived the real reason for her strength, Anna Julia, her 9-year-old daughter. Whenever Eliane walked through the rusty gate with her backpack on her back and her tired shoulders, she was greeted with the most sincere hug the world could offer. That night, when she got home, Eliane found Anna sitting on the sofa, her math notebook on her lap and her forehead furrowed in concentration. She smiled when she saw her mother and ran to tell her that she had gotten top marks at school. Eliane smiled back, proud, and said, "That's how we change the world, my daughter, with a full head and a clean heart." After a quick shower and a simple dinner, the two sat down at the table with their language books. It was a silent ritual between them. Eliane taught words in French, English, or Chinese, and Anna repeated everything with joy. The girl found it fun, but she didn't know that it was part of her mother's plan to keep alive, within the home, the certainty that they were capable of much more. Between lessons, Eliane jotted down questions she needed to review later in her notebook, while Anna drew hearts next to the ideograms. In that space of time, far from the cold corridors of the company, Eliane was more than a cleaner. She was a teacher, a warrior mother, and a woman who refused to be defined by the badge she wore at work. After putting Anna Julia to bed, Eliane sat on the living room sofa with a cup of tea and her old tablet in her hands. There, she researched technical terms from the contract she had heard between the executives. Mandarin words such as strategic partnership, compliance, and international expansion appeared in her searches, and she read everything with the attention of a professional translator. This was not a passing curiosity. It was preparation. Even though no one had offered her a chance, she behaved as if the job was already hers. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her focus remained. With each page she read, she felt closer to something that did not yet have a name, but that pulsed in her chest like a promise. Sometimes she imagined what it would be like to sit at a meeting table and be heard, not as an exception, but as an expert. Other times, she remembered the last interview she had before accepting the cleaning job. A manager who read her resume with disdain and said she was overqualified for the position. Eliane smiled bitterly as she remembered this. Overqualified was just a polite way of saying she didn't fit into that world. But even so, she persisted, because she knew that the world is cruel to those who carry a broom, but generous to those who carry conviction. And if there was one thing she was certain of, it was that knowledge takes up no space, and sooner or later it opens doors that prejudice tried to close. That night, before going to sleep, Eliane looked up at the dark ceiling of her room and whispered softly, "I'm ready." The next morning arrived wrapped in a thin fog, as if even the weather could sense that something important was about to happen. At Global X, the hallways were busier than usual. A sense of anxiety hovered over the desks, on the shoulders of the employees, and especially over the head of Mr. César. The contract with the Chinese investors, anticipated for months, depended entirely on that meeting. It was the company's chance to expand internationally, attract new investors, and cement César's image as the visionary executive he loved to present himself as. He arrived early, as always, but this time he carried a black folder in his hands and wore a look of worry masked by arrogance. He had put on the most expensive suit in his closet and demanded that everyone be flawless. Bruna handed out reports with trembling fingers, while Leonardo reviewed the main points of the contract in a tense voice. The translator hired by the company, a young man recommended by a consultancy, had still not arrived. "It's just traffic," Bruna kept saying, trying to convince herself. But every passing minute felt more like a threat. That day, Eliane was cleaning the corridor near the meeting room. She had noticed the unusual commotion, the hurried whispers, the anxious steps. With the cloth in her hand, she listened in silence, and she understood everything. She knew the investors' names, the expected arrival time, and even the contents of the documents circulating in English and Mandarin. The difference was that, to her, that information wasn't just data, it was a door slightly ajar. Even while being ignored, she knew that chaos was approaching, and deep down she knew that maybe, just maybe, she was the only one who could prevent disaster. At exactly 10:10 a.m., silence swept through the main hall. Black cars parked in front of the building. From them stepped Mrs. Zhang and Mr. Wei, accompanied by two assistants. Dressed in elegant discretion, they carried folders and alert gazes. They were greeted by Bruna and formally led to the conference. room. When Mr. Cesar saw them, he forced a wide smile, but the sweat on his temples betrayed his unease. Everyone sat around the long glass table. The conversation began in English, but quickly shifted to Mandarin, the investors' preferred language, used to address the sensitive details of the agreement. And that's when everything fell apart. The translator never showed up. No call, no message. He had simply disappeared. Cesar looked around, trying to improvise, while the Chinese executives exchanged puzzled glances at the lack of organization. Mr. Wei asked something directly to Cesar, who just smiled awkwardly and replied, "Yes," clearly not understanding. Mrs. Zhang furrowed her brow, sensing the discomfort. Leonardo tried to step in, but didn't know how. Bruna frantically searched for someone who could translate. The contract, worth millions, was slipping through their fingers. Outside the room, leaning against the wall with her cleaning cart, Eliane watched the scene unfold. She took a deep breath. Her heart pounded harder, yet she felt an odd calm. This was the opportunity she never asked for, but one she was ready to seize. It was the moment when knowledge would speak louder than any title, and the silence of everyone else would finally be broken by the voice of someone who had always been ignored. Seconds felt like hours inside the conference room. The air conditioner hummed. Papers on the table quivered lightly from the cold draft that no one else seemed to notice. Mr. Cesar wiped his forehead discreetly to remove the sweat. Bruna kept her eyes locked on her tablet, trying to disguise the panic rising in her chest. Leonardo fidgeted with his pen, as if hoping it held the answer to a problem with no solution. Across the table, Mrs. Zhang and Mr. Wei exchanged quick phrases in Mandarin with their assistants, clearly bothered by the amateurism of the situation. The contract, one that promised to elevate Global X to another level, was on the verge of collapse. That's when a soft voice rose from the back of the room, slicing through the silence like lightning in the dark. "Excuse me." Everyone turned at once. At the doorway, with her hands gently clasped and posture calm, stood Eliane. She had entered without making a sound, without being called, without permission, but with a courage none of the others could have mustered at that moment. Mr. Cesar, stunned, stepped forward. What do you think you're doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling. Eliane didn't answer him. She turned directly to the investors and, with the steady tone of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, began to speak in fluent Mandarin. The room froze. The surprise on the Chinese executives' faces was immediate. Mr. Wei responded with a long sentence, testing her fluency. Eliane not only understood, it was clear in her confident, natural reply. A second later, Mr. Wei smiled subtly and gestured for her to continue. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. Bruna dropped her tablet onto the table. Leonardo opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mr. Cesar remained frozen, trying to grasp what was happening before his eyes. Eliane, who just moments before had been the woman with the mop, was now commanding the conversation with the authority of someone born for that room. She translated the key clauses of the contract with precision, explained technical terms, resolved misunderstandings, and led the discussion with poise and professionalism. Every word she spoke was a strike to Cesar's ego, and a silent lesson. To everyone who had ever dismissed her, the most remarkable part was her composure. She didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice, didn't seek validation. She simply did what she knew how to do, with excellence. The Chinese investors were impressed. One of them even praised her pronunciation and cultural knowledge aloud. Eliane smiled, thanked him, and continued. The atmosphere in the room shifted completely. What was once tension turned into relief. The meeting flowed with ease, and in the end, both parties shook hands with enthusiasm. The contract had been saved, and it had a name: Eliane. When it was over, she bowed respectfully to the investors and turned to leave. She paused for just a moment in front of César, looked him in the eye, and said calmly, "Sometimes it's in silence that we learn the most." Then she walked toward the door. There was nothing left to prove. The whole world, at least the one inside that company, had just heard the voice no one expected, and they would never forget her. The post-meeting buzz swept through the hallways like an invisible electric current. As soon as Eliane left the room, the employees who had once ignored her were now exchanging stunned glances and hushed whispers. In the back of the hallway, near the coffee machine, two interns whispered to each other, "Did she really speak Mandarin? Fluently?" And the other replied, "She did. I understood a little. She saved everything." Bruna was still sitting at the conference table, staring blankly ahead with her tablet powered off in her hands. Leonardo was organizing papers without knowing what else to do. Mr. César, standing by the window, kept his hands in his pockets, trying to hide his embarrassed face. But the mask of arrogance no longer fit. It had cracked. One of the Chinese businessmen approached Bruna and, in clear English, asked for the interpreter's full name. "We'd like to stay in direct contact with her. We're impressed." Bruna, unsure of what to say, simply took down the name. When César tried to insert himself into the conversation, the businessman was polite but direct. "Without Eliane, this negotiation would have failed. She has vision, knowledge, and respect. That's rare." Those words cut deeper than any scream. César swallowed hard. He, who had publicly humiliated Eliane over a spilled bucket of water, now had to face the truth. His company had been saved by the woman he always treated as disposable. There were no excuses, no explanations, and worse, there was no going back. Eliane, meanwhile, didn't return to the meeting room. She was in the locker room, calmly changing out of her uniform. She removed her badge, tucked her notebook into her bag, and took a deep breath. Inside, she was a whirlwind of emotions, but her face remained composed. As she walked out through the service exit, she ran into Bruna in the hallway, who tried to say something, but was cut off by her own guilt. I didn't know you," she stammered. Eliane simply smiled gently and said, "Now you do." She walked past her with dignity. As she stepped into the reception area, the same people who used to look right through her were now watching her with quiet respect. Some even stepped aside to make way for her, but she wasn't looking for applause. She was looking for peace. As she crossed the main entrance, the afternoon sun touched her face like a silent reward. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. She was no longer the invisible employee. She was the woman who had done what no one else in that building, with all their degrees and salaries, had managed to do: win back the trust of one of the most influential investors in the Asian market. Meanwhile, César remained frozen at the 14th floor window, watching her walk away. And in that still moment he understood. He had lost far more than control. He had lost the right to judge who deserves to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance to ask for forgiveness, even if he knew, deep down, that some wounds aren't healed with words. They scar over with actions. The next day began with a strange silence in the corridors of Global X. It wasn't the usual quiet that comes with cold mornings. It was a different kind of silence, the kind that clings to people when they carry discomfort, even while going through the motions of their routine. The image of Eliane saving the company still echoed in whispered conversations. That morning, people looked for her, but she didn't show up. On the bulletin board in the cleaning department, a short note had been taped up. "Thank you for the opportunity. Life goes on. Eliane." There were no dramatic farewells, no words of bitterness. Just a quiet goodbye from someone who chose to walk away on her own terms, with her head high and her heart at peace. Mr. César read the note twice. He stood still, unmoving, with his hand resting on the paper. For the first time, the man who had always believed himself superior felt the weight of a loss caused entirely by his own arrogance. For the rest of the morning, he didn't attend meetings, didn't answer calls. He locked himself in his office, staring at the table where it had all happened. In his mind, he pictured Eliane there, speaking Mandarin to the investors, with the poise of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. He tried to come up with a justification for his behavior, but found only the echo of his own vanity. Eventually, he picked up the phone and called Human Resources. He asked for Eliane's contact number. The answer was blunt. She requested that no personal information be shared. The sting of rejection hit him like a sentence. He had lost the right to redeem himself directly. Meanwhile, Eliane walked calmly down a tree-lined street downtown, her daughter Anna Julia by her side. She had taken the girl out for a special snack, something simple but deeply symbolic. They sat in a charming bakery, ordered 2 juices and some cheese bread. Anna chatted excitedly about her science test, and Eliane listened with tenderness. At the next table, an elderly couple whispered that they'd seen a woman who looked just like her in an internal company video, praising her intelligence and courage. Eliane pretended not to hear. She wasn't seeking recognition. She did what she did because she knew she could, and everything she endured because she had to. That afternoon, she received an international phone call. It was Mrs. Zhang's assistant. "We'd like to invite you to participate in a language exchange project between companies," he said. Eliane smiled, thanked him humbly, and asked for a few days to think. She knew her life was changing, but she wanted to do it in her time, her way. She wasn't seeking revenge. She just wanted to live with dignity. When she got home, she sat on the couch with Anna, pulled out her language notebook, and wrote down 3 words, one beneath the other: respect, silence, worth. Then she looked at her daughter and said, "Never forget this, my love. The world might try to silence you, but if you know who you are, your voice will echo in the highest places." And in that moment, no spotlight, no applause, Eliane knew she had already won. That was today's story. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the perfect time to do it. Don't forget to share this video with more people. I'll see you in the next one.